You look at the Jaguars, only 204 for Trevor Lawrence, but 7 yards per attempt. That gets you on the fringe of, all right, things are working. You're moving the ball well. And neither team was explosive last night on offense, except for Trevor Lawrence when he ran the ball, Peter. Look at that, 59 rushing yards, career high. And I think they may have rope-a-doped the Saints a little bit into thinking he was going to stay in the pocket with that giant knee brace on, with the knee injury that had him questionable for the game. He threw caution to the wind 4 or 5 different times, and he was turning on the Jets. There was a run, second half, a drive that didn't do much of anything after the game was tied at 24. I mean, he's as fast as any quarterback in the NFL when he took off despite that knee brace. So we're kind of pivoting from Saints dysfunction to what worked for the Jaguars. There he goes there. One of the things that worked best is the last thing we expected to see last night was Trevor Lawrence running the ball with that knee injury.
Yeah, and Trevor Lawrence, look, I think what Doug Peterson said to Kaylee Hartung, about, how Trevor Lawrence, was playing well, seemed comfortable. You're watching the game and you're saying, what injury? And are you serious that he was questionable coming into this game? Now, with an injury like that, a lot of times moving laterally is what you can't do. But Mike, Trevor Lawrence seemed fine last night. And again, I look at the Jaguars right now, and maybe it is that, they haven't played very many what I would call complete games this year. And they've had a couple of bad days. Their 20-point loss at home to Houston, that's a bad day. And so we'll see about the Jaguars. They seem to be the best of a bad division. And so I think they're going to win that division. But I think we all thought at the beginning of the year that they had a heck of a chance to not just get in the playoffs and be the 4th seed. But, I picked them to be the top seed because their schedule is soft and because I thought they were coming at the end of last year. And they got to start playing complete games, I think. And look, they beat Buffalo in London. They beat Atlanta in London. They swept their 2 London games in 8 days. That's great. And so I think they're a good team. How good they are, it's crazy to say. We may not know that much about it because if you look at their schedule, they don't have a lot of pitfalls on their schedule the rest of the way.
Oh, and that's the key. That's one of the reasons why you made them the number 1 seed, because of that schedule. And they are 5-2 at a time when there's a handful of great teams, a handful of horrible teams, and everybody else in the middle. Who's going to emerge from the middle? And the Jaguars, who started 1-2, they got that week 1 win at Indy, lost at home to the Chiefs, embarrassed by the Texans. They've now just been checking them off one at a time, 4 in a row. And here they are at 5-2. And as they mentioned last night on the broadcast, we're not going to see much of them between now and mid-November. They've got the Steelers after their mini bye in Pittsburgh. Then they have their full bye. Then they've got the 49ers November 12 at home. Next 2 games, we're going to learn a lot about the Jaguars. Can they go into a place like Pittsburgh where even when the Steelers' offense is doing absolutely nothing, gaining negative yards, they still find a way to win with that defense and the support they get from the crowd? Can they win in Pittsburgh? And there was a time, 2007, and this is their best start since 2007. The Jaguars won twice in Pittsburgh that year in the regular season and in the playoffs. Can they do that again as they try to have one of their best years that we've seen in a very long time? So, look, I agree with you. They haven't played a complete game yet. Not many teams have played a complete game yet this year. The Jaguars, who I thought were kind of the AFC equivalent of the Lions, and at least had made it to the playoffs, unlike the Lions. They made it to the playoffs. They won a game. They gave the Chiefs more than we thought they were going to give them. They covered the spread late on a touchdown as they were trying to wipe out a 10-point deficit, yada, yada. They were a team that you could peg, and you were right to make them a potential number 1 seed. I think it was a smart decision, and they still could be, because as these other teams fight amongst themselves, these other great teams, and necessarily deal out losses to each other. The Jaguars, once they get through these next two, they start pulling cards that are winner, 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 and they could finish 13-4 or 12-5 and maybe be in position, not just to win the division, maybe get a fairly high spot on the playoff tree. Let's hear a little bit from Trevor Lawrence. That knee injury he got late in the Colts game when he was gator rolled, and it looked like maybe he wasn't going to play. Here he is on how the knee feels after those 59 rushing yards, and he looked perfectly fine otherwise on the night.
It's good. I mean, golly, it's crazy how you have something like that going on and you don't plan on moving a lot and you end up running the ball more than I usually do. So it's funny how that works. But, it felt pretty good. I was happy with it and didn't bother me too much. Definitely didn't, set it back. So I'm really, really happy with that. That was the goal, is play, find a way to win the game and not set it back. And we'll get 10 days now to recover and get ready for Pittsburgh. So, I mean, it went perfect, honestly. So that was really good.
And he finally got a win at the Superdome. His only 2 losses in 3 years at Clemson came in that building. And he finally got the win. Had to do it the hard way, had to earn it. Should have been easier than it was. But I think one of the reasons he's smiling, not just the fact that the knee got no worse, because we didn't see him take any awkward hits. He knew how to avoid and protect that knee, but he finally won in New Orleans. And that's a huge swing game. When you think about how we view the Jaguars, think of what we'd be saying about them today, Peter, if they had lost that game. 4-3, and you blow a game like that, and the Saints had never come back from 15 or more points in the fourth quarter, to starting the fourth quarter down that much to win a game ever in franchise history, and you let them do it when it was 24-9 and should have been worse, and you let them do it. We would have spent the first hour of the show saying, my God, the house is on fire for the Jaguars. And now they've got the Steelers and the 49ers, and they're maybe going to be 4-5 by the time they get a chance to start digging out of this. So it was a good night for the Jaguars that could have gone sideways very easily. And like I said, we would have a much different attitude and view of them this morning if they hadn't found a way to settle it down, score the late touchdown after it was tied up, and then hold off the Saints at the very end.
Let's just say one other thing about sort of what we learned out of this game. And I think what we learned a lot of in this game was that in the important moments of the game, and I am going to accept EXCEPT, the end of this game, even though obviously it is an important part of the game. But throughout this game, until the fourth quarter, really, I just think there was so much to worry about for the future of the New Orleans Saints. And I'll just bring up one number that I did last night after the game. I mean, the Saints, over the last 5 games, and that includes a 34-0 victory over the Patriots. Over the last 5 games, they are 30% on third down conversions. They're 23 out of 76. And that is awful. It's awful. There's no other word to describe a team that has Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, decent tight ends, Michael Thomas. It's mind-blowing, really, that this team is not better on offense. And I think last night we saw Kirk Herbstreit did a good thing on one of his replays where he showed in the red zone when exactly Derek Carr should have pulled the trigger and should have made a throw and had enough space to fit a ball into a tight window in the end zone, but he had space. And by the time he threw it, the window was gone. And, maybe we're just seeing really what Derek Carr is, which is a guy who has had some great opportunities like last year and then handed another franchise this year. Maybe he's just not that good, Mike. And I am hesitant. I'm hesitant to cast his career, in the trash bin. But the last 2 years, the last year and a half rather, just say some very, very concerning and very negative things about Derek Carr. And if you are Mickey Loomis, if you're Dennis Allen, if you're Pete Carmichael, if you're the people who are really in charge of this offense, you really have to start thinking, are we going to have to make another change at the end of the year? And their cap situation is so horrible that it's almost like they'd have to start over with a rookie and basically take their lumps, which when you have a veteran defense, that's something you just don't want to do.
Well, and Peter, you alluded earlier to the fact that Josh McDaniels, the Raiders coach, decided after 1 year with Derek Carr to move on. That wasn't the vibe they tried to create when he signed in April of 2022. What was reported as a 3-year, $121.5 million extension with, and you hear all the superlatives when the contract is done and it's handed to the reporters who will rush to Twitter and paint it as the greatest thing ever. And I remember when I got the actual contract and started picking through it, it's like, hey, everybody who's saying this is a great deal, there's some language in here that makes it pretty clear that they can cut this guy after one season if they want to. This is a 1-year experiment with a little bit of a raise. It's a 1-year experiment between Josh McDaniels and Derek Carr. And lo and behold, that's why they benched him after 15 games. They needed him to be healthy so they could cut him right after the Super Bowl. If he wasn't healthy, they wouldn't have been able to cut him, and they would have been stuck with $40 million additional in full guarantees. That's why it was Jarrett Stidham time. That's why he disappeared. He was upset, etc. Now, Peter, we pivot to what the Saints did after he finally became available. The Saints are stuck. Now, they don't have to play him, but they're stuck through 2024, $70 million over 2 years minimum, and there's guarantees that go into the third year that they would have to hope that someone will sign him and they'll get an offset, another $10 million. So they made a real commitment. They didn't do a 1-year experiment, even though it very much feels like an experiment, as you said earlier. They're stuck financially. Doesn't mean they have to play him. Doesn't mean they can't draft somebody or go with someone else. But financially, they're in a tough spot. Unless they could trade him in the offseason, I don't know who you trade that contract to when you look at the film that he's generating. And there's nothing wrong with saying a guy is kind of as good as he's ever going to be. I say it about Kirk Cousins. Like, after how many years does a guy have to play before that's where he is? He's got his plateau. He's who he is. He'll win some games. He'll lose some games. He'll make some throws. He'll make some mistakes. He'll show up sometimes, and sometimes he won't. And, every team needs a starting quarterback, and there aren't 32 franchise quarterbacks. And there are middle-of-the-pack, lower-of-the-pack guys, and Derek Carr has been a fringe top 20 guy, in my mind, for a long time. Now, sometimes his numbers will put him fringe top 10, but compiling numbers is one thing. Compiling wins, showing up in big spots is another, and it's something that, frankly, and with all due respect, and he can't block me on Twitter because he already has, he just hasn't shown up on a sufficiently regular basis. Peter, if he was capable of it, he'd still be the quarterback of the Raiders. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.